Hi, my name is Andrea, and I'm going to be talking today about one of the key principles of befriending grief. So, I've come up with three principles for the program that I'm creating, the book that I'm writing, and the circles that I'm running. And those three principles are all around reconnecting big disconnects when it comes to grief and loss in our society. One of them is a disconnect from nature itself. Another is the disconnect from our true nature as human beings that live and love and die. And then the third is the disconnect from one another, specifically related to grief and loss. So the first one is what we'll talk about today, and that is reconnecting with nature itself. So there's lots of reasons why we have become really disconnected with nature in our modern world. One of the biggest reasons, obviously, is that we've moved into cities and towns. We no longer live, on our own in more of an agricultural, way. A lot of us still do, and a lot of us are going back to that way of living, which I am a huge fan of. But the truth is that as we've grown, we've built cities, we've built homes within those cities, and there isn't a lot of opportunity and definitely not a lot of need to be out in nature like there used to be. So it used to be that we were in, hunting and gathering societies. Maybe we were in the agricultural communities. And when we were living in that way, we were very connected with the cycles of life and death. That's the world we lived in. And so we saw when animals were born, we saw when animals died. We saw evidence of life and death and rebirth in nature in terms of even the seasons and the trees. We saw, we were witnessing the leaves falling off the trees. We were dependent on nature, so we had to pay really close attention to what was happening in nature so that we could plant our crops by the moon. They used to do that, which I love. And as time went on, we had less and less of a need to pay attention to what was happening in our natural world. And as a result, we've forgotten that we actually are nature. There's lots of examples. If you just Google like images of thumbprints and the tree rings, sometimes you can't even tell them apart. The branches on trees related to the branches in our, lungs and our respiratory system. Those are just a couple of examples, but it's really interesting how much we have gotten away from the fact that we are a part of nature itself. And so as a result, we've kind of thought about life and death as this very linear process. And definitely the grieving process, anybody that is out there, looking for grief resources and things like that, you'll probably see a lot of things that indicate that grief is not a linear process and that there are no real stages to the grieving process. Now, I do happen to know that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross never intended for those stages to be applied to the grieving process. There's a whole thing around that. But the point is that there aren't very many alternatives to this viewpoint. It's just that we know that it's not a linear process. So as I was thinking about this and I was contemplating how the grieving process is actually how it actually is, I'm reminded that everything in nature is cyclical and rhythmic. So if you think about the cycles of the year, or the seasons of the year, I should say, cycles and seasons within our lifetime, rhythms and cycles in our bodies. So we've got our circadian rhythms, we've got our menstrual cycles. We have, in the course of a lifetime, we have cycles of we've got puberty, we've got adulthood. For women, we have menopause. There's all of these rhythms and cycles that we can definitely count on being there because that's the way the natural world is. There just are not very many examples of linear things in nature. Now, you might say, well, a lifetime is kind of linear. We are born, we live, and then we die. That's kind of linear. In some ways, it actually is. But the way that I think about it, I think about these cycles, and that actually, if we apply the logic that we are nature and that everything in nature is cyclical and rhythmic, then we can kind of rest into that. We can trust that process. We know for sure that everything is continually and constantly changing in nature. So again, we don't see this very much if we're not out there. But all you have to do is look out your window and watch every day. Things are changing all of the time. I went for a walk this morning and the leaves are starting to fall off the trees, and I'm actually very giddy about it because I love fall. And I know for sure that over time, it's going to get cooler and cooler and cooler. I live in the Midwest, so it's going to get really cold. I can count on that. How cold? I don't know. I know it'll be colder than it is right now. And so the point is that we can look for examples of continual change, continual cycles, and continual rhythms that we can actually tap into as a way of approaching the grieving process. So the way that I've done this is I've created some grief practices around the seasons, and that's something that I'll share a little bit later. Um, but I'm really happy that I've landed on something that makes me feel a lot more grounded, a lot more settled in that even though our grief, sure, there might be some truth to the notion that we will probably carry grief with us always. And that's not a bad thing because that the grieving process allows us to tap into our natural processes that tell me that that pain that we're experiencing when we lose somebody or we're experiencing a significant loss, that will change too. And so this is just a little bit of a snippet about one of the key principles behind befriending grief, and that is around reconnecting with nature as a way to approach the grieving process and a reminder that nothing stays the same. Unfortunately, we will lose the people that we love. It's just the way it is. We will experience many transitions in our lifetime, and that is the way that the world works. What we do with that is up to us. And so, even with the most difficult losses, we can count on the fact that the pain that we're experiencing after that loss will change over time because everything changes over time. And if we tap into some of these cycles and rhythms, we can directly work with that grief. We can actively engage with it as a way, like a pathway to healing. And so that's where I'll end it today. I hope you found this helpful. And the next video will be around reconnecting with our true nature as mortal human beings. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.